Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Pragati.
Yes,
So let
Pragati,
us
you can
begin.
start. Yeah.
A very good afternoon to everyone present here. I, Pragati Chaudhary, on behalf of Geeta Ratan International Business School, extend a warm welcome to one and all in the eminent learning series on disaster management. Geeta Ratan International Business School was established in the year 2004. The institute is affiliated to Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University, Delhi, and is approved by All India Council for Technical Education, Ministry of HRD, Government of India for Technical Programs, and Bar Council of India for Law Programs. GIBS is currently offering postgraduate programs which are MBA, MBA International Business, and MCA Integrated, and undergraduate courses, namely BBA LLB, BA LLB, and BBA. It has been graded A by National Assessment and Accreditation Council in second cycle. It is also an ISO 2001-2015 certified institute. GIBS has been rated A+ by State Fee Regulatory Committee, a fee committee of Government of NCT of Delhi, and rated highest grading A by Joint Inspection Committee of Government of NCT of Delhi and GGSIP University. It has been rated grade A by Academic Audit Cell of GGSIP University consecutively from past 8 years. Also, GIBS has been rated as number 2 Pan-India by Times Business School Survey consecutively for the year 2018 and 19. At GIBS, thrust is on overall personality development of students so that they can face challenges in their competitive professional life with value-based approach. Going by this agenda of Institute, eminent lecture series is to be conducted on disaster management. Disaster is any occurrence that causes damage, ecological disruption, loss of human life, deterioration of health and health services on a scale sufficient to warrant an extraordinary response from outside the affected community or area, whether it is pandemic corona, earthquake in Gujarat or Nepal, cloud bursting in Kedarnath, mankind has to be prepared for all the disasters. Today, we have retired Major General Anurag Gupta sir with us to take us through and guide us on disaster management. It is my great pleasure to welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
Anurag sir is a disciplined and accomplished general in mechanized infantry with an unblemished military career of over 37 years in both national and international assignments. He holds PG diplomas in hospitals and healthcare management and medicos legal studies from Symbiosis, Pune. Anurag sir is having extensive expertise in equipment management, logistics, security of estates, HRM, HRD, recruitment and training of personnel, operations, licensing, procurement and negotiation, general administration, and disaster management. He is having in-depth insight into various facets of national security, national development planning, and policy implementation. He has been an outstanding leader and motivator with high caliber organizational and team building skills, played a primary role in training and skill development of troops for various operations of war as well as for peacetime duties. Sir is having a wide range of experience in adopting large communities akin to CSR and providing them with requisite life-saving skills, emergency response solution, first aid training, and creation of resource knowledge network. It is our great honor to have retired Major General Anurag Gupta sir amongst us. Without taking much time, now I would request sir to share his experiences with us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Pragati. I appreciate your very elaborate resume on me. Thank you. Good afternoon
You,
to
sir.
all of you, my dear students, MBA students, second semester of GIBS. Unfortunately, we have to do this as a virtual meeting. How I hope that the pandemic wasn't there and we could have seen each other and interacted in a much better manner. But I'm sure this pandemic won't last for long and we should be back to normal life. Well, I thank Dr. B.S. Hoti, the director of GIBS, for giving me this opportunity to exchange our views on a very important topic, that is disaster management in India. I am afraid I really do not know uh, in the series of these disaster management lectures, how many have you had and what is your level of takeoff. But I will keep it at a level where it's easy for me to just keep moving up. Well, there are a number of definitions or explanations as to what is a disaster. Pragati has very lucidly defined one, and I found a very apt one, which is to say that disaster is a calamitous event that seriously disrupts the functioning of a community or a society or a state and causes human, economical, material, environmental losses that far exceed the community's ability to cope with them using its own resources. So that is the point which is important to be seen and understood. So then it begs the question as to what is disaster management? Well, it is the organization and equipment and management, correction, of resources and responsibilities for dealing with the humanitarian aspects of emergencies in order to mitigate that impact. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, disaster management is a very neglected and a least understood subject in our country. This is primarily due to my mind, a couple of reasons. And the first one is that since disasters don't occur every day, so if one occurs as an act of God, okay, we'll carry on, chalta hai, and people are back to work. Floods come, floods go, fires take place, drought comes, earthquake comes, life goes on. Everybody has to earn a living. And the second reason is that because of India's huge geographical extent, something happening in the north or in one corner of the country really doesn't affect someone in the other or the opposite corner. For example, if there are floods in Bihar, then a poor farmer in drought-stricken and rain-starved Tirunelveli district of Tamil Nadu really doesn't give a damn about it, because he is looking at the sky for the heavens to open up and for rain to come. And there is rain in Bihar and causing floods. So I find that these are the two reasons why we are really not looking at disaster and disaster response in a very holistic manner. While although disaster management has been introduced as a subject from class 8 onwards in CBSE schools, yet it hasn't gained much traction, given that how India is prone to a variety of disasters and the huge human and economic cost that they levy. It is imperative that due seriousness is accorded to disaster management. Ladies and gentlemen, in the next 40 or 50 minutes or so, I shall cover the macro aspects of disaster management and give you how the process, or I take you through it. And if possible, we'll have some time for question answer if Dr. Hoti so desires. Okay, next slide, please. Slide. This is the preview. I shall cover the various aspects as listed on the viewfoil: the cycle, India's vulnerability, the disaster spectrum, how the disaster management evolution took place, what is the National Defense Response Force, the State Disaster Response Force, and what are the issues. Slide. Okay, this is the disaster management cycle. First thing, what everybody will come to, if the disaster happens, what happens? What does the government do? First thing in our mind will be, oh, immediate, they'll give you blankets, food, water, medical aid, and then they'll give you some shelter. Well, there has been a change to this. Now, if you look at this slide, the top half portion is all pre-disaster, the one in green. That red flash is the disaster occurrence. And the bottom is post-disaster. So in the pre-disaster, you have prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. In other words, capacity building. And in the lower one, you have response, rehab, and reconstruction. Now, mind you, these are not watertight or sacrosanct activities that one follows the other. No, at all stages in a nation, these are ongoing activities. There is never a time when you can say, okay, one activity now, disaster has occurred, so we will not do what was happening pre-disaster. It has to be done. It's an ongoing process, it's a long-term process. So what is prevention? Actually, prevention is a misnomer because it gives a feeling that you can prevent disasters. It's not possible. Yes, man-made disasters can be prevented, but natural disasters cannot be. So prevention is actually actions taken to lessen the scale of impact. We come to the main one, that is mitigation. Prevent future emergencies. What is it? It is prevention of future emergencies and taking steps to minimize their effect. The steps to protect people and property and decrease the risks and consequences of a disaster occurring. Basically, the aim is to reduce vulnerability to disaster impact. For example, you carry out property inspection to fortify it, strengthen it. Then zonal and land use management revision is taking place that, look, are we okay? If an earthquake comes, are we structurally sound? Can we improve upon it? So all this is happening before a disaster occurs. Nobody can predict an earthquake. So you can't say that, okay, it will be coming in next year, so let us start doing it now. No, it is an ongoing process. What is preparedness? These are actions taken ahead of time to be ready. Example, training of personnel, of population, education, drills, exercises, evacuation plans, contingency plans, standard operating procedures, early warning drills, communication setup. All these form part of preparedness. It's an entirely separate and a very vast subject, and it cannot be covered just by sitting in a lecture hall or in a classroom. You have to go onto the ground, interact with various people, and get into it. Now, what happens when the disaster strikes? And that is shown by the red blast. Immediate or while the disaster is on, there is a response. What do? Aim is to protect the people, property during this crisis, and you address the immediate threat. You move people out. You implement disaster response plans. You set up emergency operation center. Communications are tied up. Evacuation plans are put into place. Food, water, clothing, medical aid is provided at various levels. Coming to the post-disaster, that is the lower portion. First, we'll look at rehabilitation. These are construction of temporary public utilities and housing as an interim step to assist long-term construction or activities. You do only temporary activities in terms of utilities and housing. You can't start constructing proper houses. You have to have prefab huts. You'll put up tents, you'll put up other activities to protect the people. In reconstruction is what the major activity takes place. You upgrade the replacement of infrastructure. You do not want to construct a building again which has the same ability to withstand a disaster. There is no point. You're wasting money. So what you're going to do is you're going to further strengthen that particular infrastructure so that it can take on that level of disaster. And then you have another one called development. These are construction of long-term disaster reduction measures For example, in flood-prone area, you construct embankments so that the water flow is contained. In landslide areas, hilly terrain, you have more plants, plantation, so that the soil is retained. Then earthquake-resistant infrastructure is made all over. Early warning setup and things like that. So that constitutes all activities what would be part of a disaster management. Right? Okay, looking at India's vulnerability to disasters, I'll let you read it. It's self-explanatory. Please look at the figures. More than half the land of our country is prone to earthquakes. Then 70% of cultivable area is vulnerable to drought conditions. Floods, river erosion affect another 12% of the land. And our 75% of the coastline, we have tsunamis and cyclones. We just battled two of them recently, one on the west coast, and if that wasn't enough, we had one on the east coast. But Odisha, hats off to that city or the state and the administration. They've been able to just manage with 9 or 10 lives, and a lot of pre-warning and other activities have saved that state. Slide. This is the disaster spectrum. I mean, you name it, India has problems. You have fire, explosions, chemical factories, industrial areas, CBRN, that is chemical, biological, radioactive, and nuclear. You must be hearing about, get back please. You must be hearing about China being now suddenly being blamed for the Wuhan virus, as they call it, for the coronavirus. It's all part of the CBRN, biological. After all, biological warfare by a country is to plant or disseminate certain biological elements into that enemy country by which it can incapacitate them without firing a shot. And as time goes, this will gain even more traction. Then you have epidemics, like this pandemic which is on, urban floods, sabotage, terrorism, building collapse, accidents, road, rail, air. You hear of them in the papers every other day. Slide. Now let's look at the evolution process of disaster management. You know, not many of you would know that before 2001, disaster management was under the Ministry of Agriculture. And it doesn't take a very intelligent guess. It's because in our country, we had only two things, floods and drought and floods. And both were affecting Ministry of Agriculture in a majorly way. Good 20 years back, we didn't have the other kind of course, rail accident, train, something of those activities were there, but the major disasters were those two. And actually, the first major earthquake, that is the Gujarat earthquake, was the trigger for creation of a disaster management agency. People sat up and said, okay, we don't have a disaster management organization. We left it to Ministry of Agriculture. This is nonsense. So in 2002, the disaster management responsibility was taken out from agriculture and put under Ministry of Home Affairs. And in 2005, a Disaster Management Act was established and passed, and NDMA, this is the kind of a book or the booklet which gives out the act in its entirety. There has been a paradigm shift in disaster management. Earlier, like I mentioned, it was disaster happens, provide response and relief. It was only that. We never thought beyond it. Now it is so much more proactive and holistic one, which encompasses prevention, mitigation, preparedness, rehab, reconstruction, and development, which I just spoke about. So it's an entire paradigm shift in our thought process and how we handle or look at disasters. Slide. This is again how we have looked at disaster management, how we're looking at it from a new angle. Like I mentioned, focuses on developing holistic capabilities to include those 5 activities, then a framework, NDMA Act, and then we set up or we institutionalized disaster management. We made people responsible, people answerable. We had district disaster management authority at the nation, at the center, state, and district level. I will come to it slightly later. Then you had the policy plans were put in place, and DRR, that is disaster risk reduction, was made an integral component. Next. Now look at this. This is an important slide for you to understand how the system functions. NDMA, that is the National Disaster Management Authority, which was made from the Act. The chairman is the Prime Minister. The vice chairman is a gentleman of the Cabinet Secretary status. And you have 4 members who are the Secretary to Government of India status and 5 joint secretaries. I'm only talking about the setup now. I'll come to what they do later. At the state level, the chairman is the chief minister. And at the district level, obviously the district magistrate. In addition, you have institutions like the National Disaster Response Force. These are the soldiers you would be seeing in that combat bluish color dress and sometimes in the orange colored jacket and trousers. You would be seeing them at various places wherever a disaster has occurred. So the NDRF is at the response is given by it at the center level, when the center directs it. In addition to this, you have the State Disaster Response Force, which are exclusively prepared or geared up from within the state resources, and they will provide immediate succor at the place where the disaster has occurred. And then, of course, you have the NIDM, which is the National Institute of Disaster Management. This is also in Delhi. This undertakes research in disaster management, develops training modules, and organizes training programs. Slide. Now, role of government. As you are aware or would be aware that a disaster is primarily the responsibility of the state government in which state it occurs. The central government supplements relief on an as required basis. That is an important point. Sometimes some of the state chief ministers put their hands up and say, "Hamara paas kuch nahi hai," and they look back and say, tell the center, start doing it and play political games. This is not how it should be. Now, another important question is the financial mechanism. Now you're looking at NDRF and SDRF. Now don't confuse them with the forces. This is National Disaster Response Fund. It's not a force, it's a fund. Similarly, State Disaster Response Fund. The contribution of the money is in the ratio of 75:25. The center government puts in, say if it is 1 rupee, 75 paisa is put in by the center and 25 paisa is put in by the state into that 1 rupee kitty. And it may interest you to know 32,000 crore rupees have been allocated for 2020-21, primarily for disaster relief activities. So out of 32,000, 3/4 of the amount has been given by the center, and 1/4 would be by the state. In most of the cases, what happens is the center puts in, and then a book debit takes place later on. In exceptional cases, center does provide additional relief in case the disaster is of such a magnitude that it is beyond the capability of that particular state, then obviously it will chip in. Slide. This is a 3-tier disaster management structure. On the left, you see the top national level. You have the NDMA I mentioned to you. It has, I won't say under it, it has the following forces on which it can lay control on. That is I mentioned the National Disaster Response Force, the Defense Forces of India, that is the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, BSF, and the Central Armed Police Forces, CRPF, DSF, CISF, ITBP. So all the national assets are available on the orders of the government to provide assistance wherever required. Now coming on to the state level in blue, you have the State Disaster Management Authority, which I mentioned at the state headquarters. In the terms of forces, you have the State Disaster Response Force and other agencies like police, you have civil defense, you have home guard, fire brigade, all of them and such a time come together and help out. At the district level, which is the last tier in green, you have the civil administration, the police, civil defense, home guard, fire service, local communities and NGOs. These are very important entities. Local communities can do wonders because in a state also, which say huge state like Uttar Pradesh, and a disaster strikes in one of the eastern districts, by the time reaction takes place by the center or the state, it is the district level where these forces are, the police, the home guard, NGOs, that they can come and react. So it's a very important structure. Slide. Now, which are the various early warning agencies which we have in our country, which tell us about the forecasting? You would have all read in the newspapers. Most often you come to know about the weather condition. Will it rain tomorrow? It's going to be hot, whatever condition. So that is the IMD. It has other role. So for cyclone, IMD is responsible. Tsunamis, you have INCOIS, that is Indian National Center for Oceanic Information Services. Not many of you would be aware of this. Well, hopefully even the tsunamis come once in 3 or 4 years. So it's all right. Earthquakes. Now, earthquake is the only natural disaster which comes unannounced. Maximum you get is 3 or 4 minutes of reaction time. Otherwise, floods, you have enough time. Fire, forest fire, you have enough time, you can react. Landslides also, when you find in the hills, it's raining, obviously there's a chance of a landslide. So for earthquake, you have IMD again. Floods is Central Water Commission. Landslides is GSI. And avalanche is SASE, Snow and Avalanche Studies Establishment. That gives out adequate warning or bulletins to tell all those people who go to ski, paraglide, parasail in snow-covered areas that be careful because avalanche can be very, very destructive. Next. Now, there are 19 guidelines which have been issued by the NDMA, and the topics are as given on the foil. Urban flooding is coming up. Go back, please. Urban flooding is coming up in a big way. Chennai floods was an example of urban flooding. What happens when you start constructing buildings on dried water channels, nalas, escape channels? When you start constructing concrete structures, where does the water go? It has to find its way. So obviously, if everything is concrete, there is no water going into the ground, no subsoil. So this is a major issue. And because of money, greed, a lot of land builders, developers have resorted to doing this business. Next. Biological disasters. I was talking to you about it. Okay, next, please. Now, there are certain calamities which are eligible for relief in the sense that if these take place, then the various departments provide monetary and other benefits to that particular state, which then passes it on to the affected population. Home Affairs handles cyclone, tsunami, earthquake, landslides, cloudburst, fire, flood, and avalanches. Ministry of Agriculture also has a responsibility. It looks into the drought, pest attacks. Remember, I think last year it was when the locust came in from Pakistan, locust attack came into Gujarat, Rajasthan, Haryana, even in Delhi. We saw a lot of YouTube videos where a lot of locusts had settled down on the rooftop and on trees. Luckily, they went away. So, hailstorm, cold wave, and frost. Now, you must be wondering as to what about heat wave? If there's a cold wave and heat wave is not mentioned. So, heat wave and lightning strike. Lightning strike, maximum people are killed in Bihar. I have not been able to understand why it happens. But you'll find 7 die of lightning strike in some way of place. So heat wave and lightning strike are not classified as disasters, but come under state-specific disaster. And they are dealt between the center and that particular state. And pandemics, all of a sudden, because of COVID, is being considered as a calamity and would be incorporated in due course of time as a for relief. Next. Now we're looking at the National Disaster Response Force. Like I mentioned to you earlier, these are those troops in bluish, grayish combat dresses, which are in the vanguard of any disaster. I have a look at them. Next. What are the unique features? It is a multidisciplinary, multi-skilled, high-tech force capable of responding to any natural disaster, including the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear emergency. These people are drawn from the CAPF on deputation. CAPF is centrally armed police force that, as I mentioned to you earlier, BSF, CRPF, CISF, ITBP. So they come for 5 years. They leave their weapons behind with the particular, say, from BSF, and they come on a deputation for 5 years to the Ndrf. The reason is that if we want to set up a 20,000 strong force without taking anyone from these forces, we would have to train them first in basic duties and then into these specialized skills. And that would take years. So as an interim gap or interim measure, it was decided that let us draw trained personnel in basic art of soldiering from these and then train them in their Ndrf activities. So this is the largest standalone disaster response force in the world with currently 14,000, but it is being expanded. The force can form 216 teams comprising of 45 people each. Each team means has 45 people, which includes engineers, paramedics, technicians, electricians, and a dog squad. Dogs are extremely useful in smelling out a human being under the rubble or the debris, as also any TNT or detonation which may be placed, and even drugs. So the dogs are trained to identify each and the various different activities, and they have a different kind of a bark for it. You'll be surprised. If possible, you all must go to the nearest NDRF company, which is there in Dwarka, and have a look at their training. They are trained and equipped for search and rescue operations as per international standards. Next. The command and control of this force. The command and control of this force is by the Director General of NDRF. You would have seen him, Mr. Monti, who comes in the newspapers. Even yesterday, he was there talking about that we have done a very good job in Orissa, and we have managed to control and contain the effect. And the superintendent's direction and control is with the NDMA. So there is a basic problem. And both are directly under the MHA. What I mean to say is, the DG NDRF does not report to the NDMA. He is reporting directly to the Joint Secretary or Secretary MHA. And so is the NDMA reporting to them directly. Whereas it says that direction and control is under NDMA. So how can it exercise effective command and control when you have two different bosses? So that is a lacuna which is there and which needs attention. Next. These are the capabilities of the NDRF personnel. And mind you, each team has certain elements of all this. They can go through the rubble. They have long rods which are seismic in nature, and they can hear a heartbeat. When you touch it to the wall, and if a person is just below the rubble, the heartbeat can be heard, so that they know that somebody is there. Medical first aid, flood and mountain rescue, deep sea diving, CBRN, and canine and technical search. Next. State Disaster Response Force. Next, please. Yeah. You know, India has 37 states and union territories. Unfortunately, and as a matter of big concern, that only 24 of them have their own SDRF. And out of these 24, only 8 have a dedicated SDRF. Now, what do I mean by a dedicated SDRF? Dedicated SDRF is that the force is kept separate, is in a different uniform, is equipped with all the requirement, is paid accordingly, has his own transport, has everything, headquarters, emergency operations center of its own. And the others, what other states do, in say the flood comes in a particular state. So the chief minister will tell the chief secretary, then they'll say, okay, so-and-so police stations, we need 100 boys. Then they'll tell the fire brigade from somewhere, come. Then they'll get hold of some computers, they'll have a building opened up, put the computers there, take out the maps wherever they are, if at all they are there, and try and set up a emergency operations center. By the time they set it up, the damage has been done. They have been told a number of times, please train and develop your own SDRF and dedicated SDRF. This hodgepodge ad hocism will not work, because not having an SDRF can itself be a disaster in times of a calamity. Next. This is just to give you an idea as to what the strength is and the relative. NDRF, I can mention to you, is just 14,000. It's the needle in the haystack in a country as huge as India. SDRF is even worse, 6,000 people. Civil defense, which is the backbone of every state and district, home guards, they have a good figure. Only thing is they're never trained, or regular training, practice, drills, rehearsals are never done. Fire and rescue services, another 125,000. CAPF, like I mentioned, those ITBP, CRPF, CAPF are 135,000. It is the Indian Armed Forces. Look at the size, 13 lakhs. And that is why you see, whenever a calamity occurs, whenever there's an accident, when Mr. Prince goes into the well, or an elephant goes into the well, or any accident, you see a Fauji rescuing them. Train accident, because by the time the NDRF, SDRF come, it is 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours away. Incidentally, before the NDRF was there, Indian Armed Forces were the mainstay for any disaster response. Although it is not their primary role, it is a secondary role, aid to civil authorities. But they were always there whenever the nation asked to provide relief and succor. So in terms of responders, the first responders are the NDRF. And the Indian Armed Forces are now called the second responders. So that is the difference you need to make a note of. Next. Look, go back, please. I look at a certain amount of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, that is HADR, by the armed forces. Next. Now, why are the armed forces so eminently suitable for operations, disaster response? They have a command and control setup. Everyone is answerable to someone, or somebody is answerable to him up the chain. They have adequate resources. They have an organization cohesion. They have communications, logistics, and mobility, land, sea, or air. And the focus is the military leadership, which has been tried and tested in all wars and skirmishes and battles. We are, as far as I mentioned to you, response-wise, we are the second responder. But in principle, we are always the first in, and we are always the last out. Others come and go back to their normal activities, but the forge stays on. We are always prepared and the first to respond. And the armed forces takes pride in saying so. Next. I need to, before I wind up, I need to talk about certain issues which we need to keep in mind. We need to make disaster management an essential part of good governance and integral to development planning. It can't be an ad hoc arrangement that whenever a disaster occurs or disaster is going to take place, let's get together and take conferences and take meetings and get involved. It has to be an integral part in any 5-year plan. Like I said, states have to be more serious about disaster management. And SDRF is a must-have in every state, and also a dedicated 24/7 emergency operation center. It has to be manned. It has to have the latest update. It has to have a hotline, both from people below, and it itself must be connected laterally to other states, as also on top to the National Emergency Operations Center, which is so important. So that there's a continuous flow of information from bottom to top, sideways and upwards. NDRF has an extremely limited interface with the NDMA, and I've told you the reason why, because there are reporting to do two different masters. There is inadequacy of boots on ground. There are hardly any soldiers. What is 14,000 soldiers in a huge country? Where all can they go? You may hear that 60 teams rushed to Odisha. 60 teams of 40 people, 45 people. That's just 2,000, 3,000. 3,000 is nothing. So we need, but then please understand, it costs a lot of money. It has to be done at the expense of something else. But then we have to identify and decide what is more important. Critical resources like helicopters and drones. They don't have a dedicated helicopter. ITBP has one. The others have their own ones. But when the NDMA wants, they say that it is not free. We are ourselves carrying out activities. So when you need a helicopter for reconnaissance or for evacuation, you're looking behind over your shoulder and there is nothing coming. Drones are required to carry out damage assessment. You need to, today drones can deliver, heavy duty drones can deliver medicines and immediate relief items. They can be dropped very accurately. They don't have these. They don't have a wing. Lack of accountability at all levels. One hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing, because there are so many agencies which are interfacing. When the NDRF comes into a state where the SDRF is, SDRF says, we are the boss, please step aside. We're handling it. There is, NDRF doesn't know who to tell, duplication of info, wrong information to get credit, all that goes on. And the last one, maybe a negative one, once a disaster is over, lessons are forgotten and life goes on till the next disaster comes. And then this cycle keeps repeating. Suddenly we'll wake up, we'll do something, provide relief, get back. Money is spent, where it goes, accountability is not there. Now, for example, the last year's works, what accountability is there? Is it complete? Is it under progress? Or has it been washed away with the first few drops of rain? There is no one answering because the next disaster has come and everybody is focused on that. So, sorry, these are, I'm signing off on a dull note, but these are issues which you young, dynamic students are going to now take on higher responsibilities and role in your life. Must look at this. And disasters are not going anywhere in a hurry, students. Disasters are only going to increase. You watch the way we have abused our nation, this ground, how we have played with the wildlife, how we have played with the climate. Mother Nature is not going to spare us. We are going in for a very, very tough time. Next, please. Just a thought before I sign off. In 2018, there were 315 natural disaster events recorded with 12,000 deaths and approximately 130 billion in economic losses the world over. The burden was not shared equally. That means in all the 7 continents, as Asia suffered the highest impact and accounted for 50% of the disaster events and 80% of the deaths. Earthquake was the deadliest type of disaster, accounting for 45% of death, followed by flooding. Obviously, when flood comes, people start moving to higher ground. You keep moving up and up and up away. But in an earthquake, the building just collapses. You have no time to react. And given Asia's large landmass, higher population relative to other continents, and multiple hazard risks, the results are not at all surprising. I mean, you have to keep this in mind that Asia is cursed with certain issues in terms of the population and in terms of the risks being in the southern hemisphere. Well, that's it. Next, please. Thank you. Now, as Dr. Hoti, I'm open to questions or discussions, as the case may be, as you have a norm in your university.
Yeah. Pragati, there are some questions you can ask if students have any questions.
Sir, there are no questions as such, but I would like to put a question on my behalf. May I please, sir?
Yes, please.
Sir, as you are there at such a great achievement in your lives, you have achieved a lot of things and you have trained a number of people. So there have been certain things out of which you must have feel like these are the challenges you have been through and these are the success points where you have reached. So would you like to give us just to us the what we should be following to our heart, so that not only we be worried about our own self, but as a country, as a as a citizen of the nation, we should be worried about everyone else too. So anything from your side, sir?
I've not really understood what is it that are you talking in terms of disaster management?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. People take a step ahead, they just resist themselves and they are not taking a part. Like you said that once it has happened, so they just move on and they feel like, okay, it's happened and it was God's, God's will. So we need to make pace with it and not be worried about it. So what
students, what needs to be done is to seize the moment. When a calamity occurs, like pandemic is on, you've seen so many NGOs, so many people who have started cooking food, taking it to the poor people. The auto rickshaws, they're using it to transport people to the hospital. So many good deeds are being done. So in times of a calamity, I would request all those who are capable of, in terms of physical fitness and financial resources, get together, make groups, get all your old clothes, get utensils, get tentage material, get whatever is possible. And if it's a flood or an earthquake, then you should be able to reach out to those. You can't confine yourself to a city. You have to obviously go out into the rural areas where medical aid will not reach. I know it's a very tall order, but if you, in your own groups, if you made some groups and you got it going on your WhatsApp group or any other closed user group, and you have the phone numbers, you should have the phone numbers of the electrician, a plumber who can operate a JCB, excavator, all these, if you have the database. So when a disaster strikes, you can go to the district administration, you can go to the state administration. Look, I and my team, we have this, or we have the numbers of these people. We can contact them, we can get them, and we can reach out and provide any bit of assistance will be godsend at that point of time. And if everyone or even 30% of us do it, it will work as a balm on a wound. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Well said, sir. Thanks a lot. We thank you, sir, for enlightening us and providing us basic understanding of disaster management. You made it very clear that why due seriousness is to be accorded to disaster management. as you said, that through the cycle of pre and post actions of disaster management, and told us about how reconstruction is an important aspect so as to strengthen the infrastructure. It was very good to know how the evolution process took place, and there came a gradual shift in disaster management, making it an integral part of any country's functioning. And thus, we are reaching to changing approach of managing pre and post situations of disaster. We are obliged to have you here, sir. Thank you again to arrange time for us. Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir. It was wonderful having you for this session. And definitely students have gained out of your deliberations.
Well, I hope so, because I was looking forward to some good, interesting questions. Maybe the lunch, post-lunch.
No, actually, they have understood, because I think they have understood the way you have told them.